Hey, welcome to this video where we'll discuss about input statements in Python. I hope by now you know the trend. I created a new folder, input statements. I added a file and my notes. So yeah, not much ado, let's dive in. In Python, if you want to get input from the user, use the input function. So if I just write input, this one will prompt the user for input. And once the user inputs something, to use that thing that the user has inputted, we have to store that input to a variable. That's why once you get the input, you have to store it in a variable. For example, I can create a variable called name where I'll store the input. So now if I run this code, I'll be prompted to enter some input, and once I enter that input, it will be stored in name. To prove it, I can just print this name like that. So now if I run this code, I'll be prompted for some inputs, and once I enter that input, that the thing that I entered will be printed again. So let me run this code to prove it. If I run this code, it will prompt me to enter something, and once I type, okay, you can see now it has prompted me to enter something, and if I type, let's say I type done, then I click on enter, it will say done again, because once I enter this done, it was stored in this variable name. Then line number 3 printed what I written. I think that's clear, but this is kinda not good user experience because it didn't tell me what to put in. So inside this put, you can just put in a text to direct your user what they should input. For example, I can say here, enter your name, so that the user can know that they're expected to enter their name. So now if I run, the code will tell me enter your name, then there'll be a blinking cursor. You can see now it tells me enter your name, then there's a blinking cursor. So now I know that I'm expected to enter my name. So if I enter my name like done, then I press on enter, it will tell me done. And we can even make the output even better by using the f strings that we learned. I can just say f, then I put these quotes, the one that we learned in the previous video. Then I can say your name is, then I put this, then I say name like that. So now this code will prompt the user for input. It will say enter your name, and there'll be a blinking cursor. Then once I enter my name, it will tell me my name is, then the name that I entered is what will be displayed there. Okay, let me run so that you can see it. So now there'll be a prompt there, tell me to enter my name. You can see it says enter my name. Then I'll say done. Then to tell me your name is done. So basically, this is how we use the input. In the video of data types, we talked about different data types in Python, like int, float, string, and boolean. Let me remove this code. We'll come back to it in a moment. Let us just review what we had. We had something like age, 26. Then we had something like, let me say, price. I'm trying to recap that lesson that we had. Price can be a float. Then let me say something like name, and I put the value, a string there. So what we didn't learn in that video is how to check the type of data a variable holds. For example, if you want to check the data type of this age, there's a function in Python called type. So I can just say something like type, then inside there I put my variable age. And if I print this, so let me just print this. If I print and run this code, I expect in the terminal I see int, because you have seen that age is of type integer. Okay, let us wait and see. And you can see it says class then int. So in short, you can check for the data type of a variable using the type function. This age, it's 26, it's an integer you have seen, but if you put some quotes around this 26, now 26 will be a string. So if I run this code, you can see the type of age will now be a string. It will say str to mean a string. You can see it's a string. That is because we put some quotes around the value. I think you are seeing where I'm going to. Okay, so allow me to change the variable to call it age. Then I'll put an underscore, then I say str to mean that this age is a string. So if you want to, you can see this is an error because there's no variable called age, because just change the name, but we'll correct it in a few minutes. So if you want to change that age as a string to be an integer, you can use this int function. So you just say int, then inside there you put the variable that you want it to be an integer. So I can just put my variable age string. So I'll convert this age from a string to an integer by passing it to this int function. Then I have to store it in a variable. So I'll store it in another variable. I'll call that variable age, but now int, like that. You see, I've called it age then underscore int. So now initially age was a string, then I've passed it inside this int function. I've passed that age string inside this int function. So now it has become an integer. Then I've stored that integer into this variable called age int. Now if I print the value of age int, it will now print int. You can run it to confirm. You can see now age is int. What we have done here is called type conversion. I have converted a string to an integer using this int function. You can just do the same with the float. If I need to be a float, I'll just call here the float function and so on and so forth. But we'll just learn more as we progress. I was just showing you how you can convert one data type to another. In this case, we converted a string to an integer. So let us continue. Keep in mind, this age str and age int, they're just variable names. You can just give them any name. I can just say age1, then I rename this to age1, then I can call this age2. Then I can just print here age2. Doesn't mean that I called it age int or age string to mean anything unique. It's just a name. I believe that is okay. So I'll go back to the code that we had. Our main topic of today was input. So I'll just go back to the code that I had before that one for input. So as you can see here in the notes, it says that by default, input is stored as a string. By default, this input is stored as a string. You can just check the type of name. By default, is just a string. So if you say type, then you say name, you can see it will say string by default. So let me just confirm to you that I can print here. Then if I run this code, it will just prompt me to enter the name just like we saw before. I'm just repeating what we did. It will tell me my name. So let me just say this time I'm called John. So it will say your name is John. Then since you are printing the type of the variable name, it will say string. So you have seen that by default, inputs are strings by default. But what if you wanted to, let's say, let me write a simple program where I wanted to get a number from the input. Let me say I wanted this to be a number. Like let's say enter your age. Let's call this one age. We know that age should be a number, not a string, because you want to do some things with that age. I'm renaming this everywhere because I changed the variable from name to age. Okay. So for example, I want to get the age from the user. So if I run this code, it will tell the user enter your age. Then the user can enter something like, let's say 15. Then you can say 15 is of type string. But if you want to do some complex thing with this age, you want it to be something else other than string. For example, if you wanted the age to be an integer, maybe, then you do something with that age. So to convert this input to be your desired input, for example, if I wanted this age to be an integer, I'll just wrap this input and I'll wrap it inside the int function as we saw before. So now this age will now be an integer, not a string, as you can see here in the notes. So if I save this code and run, it will just ask me to enter my name, enter my age, not name, sorry. It will tell me to enter my age. If I just enter 12, this 12 will be a string, but once it reaches this line, it will be converted into an integer in that line. So if I press enter, you can see now 12 is this age is an int. You can see it says class int. Okay, that is what you're supposed to learn today, and I think you have learned a lot about the inputs. So see you in the next video. Peace out.